All right, all right. We are back online. Let's see what we got. How y'all doing, everybody? This is Frantz Derenoncourt Jr. reporting live from my home in Bowie, Maryland. And welcome to part 3 and 4 of Haitian History 101. And we're gonna have another great time. Hopefully, yesterday was awesome, and we had a packed house, and we shared some great information. Me and my boy Dave, who's currently in Haiti, and we had got a lot of great feedback. So I want to welcome everybody that's here today. It's not quite 1 o'clock yet, so I'm going to give everybody time to log on, but we're going to get started right at 1 p.m. because we have a lot to cover. You're going to be jam-packed with information today. So hopefully everybody is limiting distractions as much as you can. I'm about to lock my office door because both my kids are home and my wife is home. So, they don't know boundaries. So they'll be coming. You may hear some knocks on my door or kids running around crazy. So I apologize for that in advance, but I'm gonna try to limit the distractions on my end, and hopefully you guys limit the distractions on your end, and we can, have a great session today. So let's see what we got here. Let me make sure everything is up and running. Looks like Dave just logged on. Dave, you can hear me?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. All right. So people are starting to log on. So I was just telling everyone, Dave, that we are jam-packed with information today. So
yeah, we gotta go to it quickly.
That's right. So yesterday we went a little bit over past 2 p.m. but we're gonna try to get to. I could stay a little bit past 2 p.m. but Dave is, has a conference call that he has to get to, so he might depart us a little bit earlier. But I'll stick around a little bit later because I know we're gonna have questions after this session. And just for the few that's on right now, definitely go in the chat room and ask questions as we're going. But we're not gonna get to the answering questions until the end of the session. So, but definitely as you're listening and watching the slides and everything, as soon as you have a question pop in your head, go ahead and write it down in the chat room so that you don't forget it at the end. And then at the end, we're gonna go through the chat. So yeah, I'm excited about this session. This is, we're gonna talk about, some of the things that I like to talk about. I like to talk about all this stuff, but in particular, the revolution and, independence, so many things to talk about. So I'm excited for this one. Okay, let's see. Okay, yeah, let me make sure that this is being recorded for sure.
It says recording, so I make it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it says recording right now. So yeah, I can't believe we lost all of that information yesterday. That was a good thing. But things happen. Hi everyone at host. Do we also get recorded copy as well? Yeah, I have to figure out how to. I'll be honest. I'm not technologically savvy when it comes to this stuff. So I'm going to try to figure out how to download the recording and send it out. I know it's a big file, so I think maybe I could just download it, send it as a Google Drive. I'm not sure, but or maybe I'll put it on a Dropbox and share it that way so that you guys could, download it on your end. Even though my Dropbox sends me a message like every other day saying I'm full, so I gotta figure that out. But this session is definitely going to be recorded, and I'll figure out a way to get it to everyone. All right, looks like we're filling up. starting to fill up a little bit. Let's see. Keep on doing that. All right. Let me get over here. Just to let everyone know, like, I created this flyer myself, so hopefully you guys like it. Dave criticized me a little bit that, you know, it still has the flyer maker on the bottom left-hand corner. You can kind of see the postermywall.com, but it's a free app. I mean, you know, just wants that little bit of advertising on the bottom left corner. I'm not gonna pay an extra $30, $40 for it. All right, that's a dope flyer. Thank you. Hello, thank you for doing this. Can you grant recording privileges? Yes. Oh, so you can record it on your end if I allow it? Is that what you're asking? Oh, I didn't know that. And you know what? I don't know how to, let me see if I could play with some of these controls. So I'm gonna disable attendee annotation, hide the panel, optimize for free video. I'm not exactly sure how to grant recording permission. Let's see. And under manage participants, okay. I got that part. I have that up, let's see. I think it's already recording. Yeah, it's recording. Let's see, mute more. Oh, allow.
I did a quick Google search. I think it says we go in the participants menu to navigate to the user who will be granted recording privileges. Click more next to their name. Select the option to allow record.
Oh, so it has to go to I have to go to each individual's
in
order to do it? Allow record. Okay. I see where it says that. Okay, so all right, if I'm gonna have to do it individually, that's gonna be kind of tough.
Yeah. Well, since she asked, maybe you could do it for her, and then we're already recording for everyone else anyway, so we'll just show that, send that to her.
Yeah, yeah. Let me. Who asked me that? Was that Miriam that asked me if she could record? Yeah, Miriam. All right, just since Miriam asked early, I'm gonna allow Miriam to record. But I'm Miriam Caesar, right? Let's see, allow record. Okay, so Miriam, there you go. All right, so I think it's 1 p.m., 12:59. All right, guys, we have a lot to go over today, man. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started, like 1 p.m. on the dot. All right, very good. Welcome everybody to Haitian History 101 Live. This is Frantz Derenoncourt Jr. And, you know, I just wanted to do something to, you know, kind of give back. I know we all stuck at home. A lot of us are stuck at home with the kids and looking for different things to do. So I want to try to offer something a little bit different. Since I can't do my events anymore, a lot of you people on here have probably been to some of my events all around the country, or mostly on the East Coast, where I do these events, book tours, and share my work and, you know, the little bit I know about Haitian history with everyone, which is one of my favorite subjects. So since I can't go out, you know, face to face with everyone now, so I figure I'd take advantage of these different, you know, technology so that, you know, I could still, you know, share some information with everyone. So we're gonna go ahead and get started because, like I said, we are full. I mean, we have a full slate today, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. Let's see, this is the schedule. So yesterday we went over the Arawaks, you know, the Tainos, and the Spanish invasion. That was a great program. Shared a lot of great information on that. So today we're gonna go over slavery, the revolution, and Independence. And then if you guys are interested, you want to log on for the rest of the week. Wednesday, we're going to go over the Empire, which was under Emperor Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and then the Kingdom, which was under King Henry Christophe. And after the fall of the kingdom, the Republic kind of took over under, the Boyer. So we're going to go over that. And then on Thursday, we're going to go over the US invasion of Haiti from 1914 to 1934. And then Friday, we got dictatorship and democracy. Let's see. All right. So I want to introduce my co-host at this time. That's me on the end, Frantz. I'm with the hat, Bookman hat. But my co-host, Dave, is currently stationed in Haiti, but you guys are able to hear him loud and clear. So Dave, go ahead and give a quick introduction of yourself.
Hello, everyone. As mentioned yesterday, I'm currently based in Haiti running my nonprofit organization, Basketball to Uplift the Youth, which uses basketball as a tool, mentor and educate Haitian youth. Been doing this for almost 7 years now. Prior to that, I lived and worked in the Washington, D.C. area, where I worked at the Haitian Embassy, where I served as Director of Culture and Education, and that's how Frantz and I met and became friends. So when he reached out to help him with this, definitely thought it would be a good way to share my love and passion for Haitian history with you all.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dave is like more than a friend. He's like a brother to me, man. We kind of like cut from the same cloth, and we enjoy a lot of the same things. So I couldn't think of a better person to help me co-host this online webinar that we're doing. So, all right, let's get into it. Slavery, revolution, and independence. All right, so yesterday we left off with, pretty much the Spanish invasion, the Taino population in Haiti pretty much being completely decimated, not completely 100%, but I mean, the majority of the population was, genocided pretty much by the Spanish. And towards the end of that, we were introduced to Bartolome De Las Casas, and he was sort of like the person who made the suggestion to the Spanish crowd to join the slave trade, the African slave trade, and start importing Africans to the Americas, because the indigenous population, the Arawak Tainos, they weren't fit for the slave labor that the Spanish were trying to put them in. And also, there weren't any left. So Las Casas, wrote this book, and, the Queen in Spain sanctioned slavery to start in the Americas. All right, so it was really like around 1503 where the first enslaved Africans arrived in Hispaniola. But early on, it wasn't necessarily plantation slave labor. That's not what the Spanish were really into. They dabbled in it a little bit, but their main focus was always, I gotta get on mute control. All right, everyone, when you come in, please mute your phones. But they were still after gold, right? That was still their main thing. And they also did a lot of, they introduced a lot of animals to Haiti, or Hispaniola, as they called it, like pigs, horses, and stuff like that. So they had like a lot of, cattle, ranches and stuff like that. And they used the Africans for mostly mining for gold and other precious metals, and to take care of like their, the livestock. Anything you want to add to that, Dave, or you good?
Yeah, I would add that one of the reasons why Las Casas encouraged the slave trade of enslaved Africans was, he became sort of like a defender of the rights of the native population, and so he figured that it would be better to bring people that he believed were more suited for the harsh physical labor. Okay, but later on in his book, which I mentioned yesterday, Historia de las Indias, he later on changed his position in which he condemned the African slave trade in that book.
Okay, yeah. All right, very good. So now, so pretty much the Spanish, their main focus was just the gold was their main thing. They weren't necessarily interested in any other type of like plantation labor and stuff like that. So they continued after the conquest of Haiti, now Hispaniola, then they continue to go throughout South America and into Mexico, where they continue. I mean, it's just, they're looking for wealth, right? Quick wealth, and gold was their number one thing. So they started going into Mexico, South America, and spreading out. And they pretty much got all they could from Haiti, from Hispaniola. So they kind of moved on, even though Hispaniola still remained a Spanish colony, but that wasn't their main focus. They kind of like moved on to Cuba, Mexico, and a lot of other places. So even though they still had Spanish, territories there, it was still a Spanish colony. That wasn't the main focus of their efforts. They kind of like ran through it, got everything they could, and then they moved on. There was still a little Spanish presence there, but not as much as the other regions in the Americas. Right. So, and they were very successful in finding like wealth, all throughout the Americas. And with the conquistadors, they went through, they stole everything they could, enslaved, a lot of the populations, decimated a lot of populations, and they sent their ships back to Spain with all of the spoils, right? So this essentially became, this is a modern map, right? So you're talking about the 1500s, you're talking about like 1500s, late 16th century, 17th century. So, the United States didn't really exist at that time and all that stuff. So don't pay attention to all of the names of the countries, but that's how it is today. But this red line that you see here became like a highway of merchant activity, of ships, like leaving Spain, jumping from all the different new territories that they conquered, and bringing all the spoils back to Spain. And it was just a constant activity of ships going back and forth from Europe to the Americas. And these ships were filled with gold and precious metals and everything that they could find of value from the Americas. And it was just a highway of activity over here. And Dave, just feel free to jump in like whenever you want to add something. All right, so now one of the main routes that the Spanish used to get to South America and to Mexico came right through this area right here between Haiti and Cuba. Right, well, between Hispaniola at the time and Cuba, called the Windward Passage, which is right here. So think of Spain right here, and they will come through right through here, and then they could hit all of these different places like Cuba, South America is down here, Hispaniola is right here, and then right into the Gulf of Mexico, Mexico right here. And the activity would come back, the ships would come back right through the Windward Passage back to Europe, right? So there was constant activity right through this Windward Passage area. And even later in history, you're gonna see that these two areas, Guantanamo Bay right here, Guantanamo, and over here is like the Mole St. Nicolas in Haiti, also becomes important. But right here was a constant flow of activity of ships with gold and stocked to the rim with a lot of precious metals. So what did that mean? That meant this little island right here, this is an island right off the coast of the north of Haiti called Tortuga, right? it's an island right off of the coast, right? This is the mainland, and this is the island. And the Windward Passage is right here, where all the ships keep coming back and forth, right? And the reason I'm highlighting this island, this little island right here, is because of the activity that started to happen because of the merchant ships that kept on going back and forth. It fostered a lot of pirate activity, right? So the pirates of Tortuga. So they saw a huge opportunity with all of these ships loaded with gold going right by the island. So there would be a lot of, attacking these merchant ships, robbing them of gold, and then going back to their hideout on Tortuga Island, right? So those movies like Pirates of the Caribbean and all that stuff, that actually happened right there in that area, Hispaniola, Jamaica, Cuba, because that was perfect hideout space for the pirates that were looting all of these ships going back to Europe with spoils from Mexico and South America. And they would actually get really rich off of that. And then they'll go onto the mainland, and they'll go back onto this mainland over here and, spend their money, get drunk or whatever, do whatever pirates do. And then when they wanted to loot more ships, they go back onto the island, hijack more ships, rob them, come back. So there wasn't a strong Spanish presence there. So they pretty much took over, even though it was still a Spanish colony, they still, had a lot of run of this land right over here in the northwest tip of Hispaniola.
I wanted to go back a little bit, Frantz, to the early transatlantic slave trade, especially since last year in the U.S., people were sort of like commemorating the 400-year anniversary of the slave trade, with 1619 being the first year that it was reported that enslaved Africans arrived in British North America and Jamestown, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
But as you've already explained here, Frantz, the transatlantic slave trade had already begun in the Caribbean and Hispaniola in particular a century earlier, as early as 1503. Okay, and those early the transatlantic slave trade was comprised mainly of Black slaves transported from Iberia. Iberia is a region of Europe that comprises of Spain and Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
And so there wasn't direct slave traffic from Africa to the Caribbean, to the Americas in general, because as I mentioned yesterday, the Spanish crown was a Catholic crown, and they didn't want to have enslaved Africans or Muslims or of other faiths going directly from Africa to the New World and bringing those non-Christian religious practices to the Amerindian populations. And so the practice was to have slaves go first to Spain or Portugal, and then to thereafter go towards Hispaniola and the rest of the Americas. But this practice wasn't too good for the business that the Spanish colonists were doing in the Americas, and so they put it to the Spanish crown to allow them to be able to have slaves go directly from Africa to Hispaniola. And that's how in 1518, Charles V, who was the grandson of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, authorized he abolished the provision requiring slaves to be born under Christian dominion, and he issued a charter saying that enslaved Africans could be brought directly from Africa to the New World.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because it was very important for them to Christianize, the Africans. I mean, that was a way of kind of like keeping them trying to keep them domiciled. So yeah, that was a great point, Dave. Thanks for adding that. So yeah, so the pirate activity kind of started to flourish. And the biggest presence of pirates were the French at that point. And there was so much activity, and they started, amassing, a lot of different, from the looting of the ships, they started being sanctioned by the French government, right? So they had kind of like support from the French. So off of the Tortuga Island, they started occupying some of that area on the mainland of Hispaniola, like I showed on that other map. And they started doing a lot of hunting and making settlements on that Spanish territory, right? So in fact, they adopted a lot of the indigenous methods of, cooking animals and, hunting and stuff like that. And they started really making, their way of life down there. In fact, they started becoming, they were being named buccaneers, which was one of the ways that the Tainos would prepare a lot of their foods. So they'll go there, they will hunt, a lot of the cattle that was roaming wild that the Spanish introduced, the pigs, that they'll make bacon out of the pigs, and it actually became an industry for a lot of people on the mainland to sell to the pirates, right, that were on Tortuga. So there was like a whole industry that was being made on the mainland, and a lot of the French kind of like, especially the pirates and the people that were there, prospered a lot.
In terms of the Buccaneers, I would add that one of the very first influential ones was a Frenchman by the name of Bartolome De Las Casas, and he was the one who encouraged the activities of the Buccaneers there, and eventually encouraged them to plant tobacco, which turned this population of Buccaneers and freebooters into a more sedentary population who was based on the island and planting tobacco amongst other crops on the island.
Yeah, absolutely. Like they pretty much made themselves at home on that Spanish territory, and but the Spanish, it didn't go unnoticed, So there was a lot of battles between the incumbent Spanish and the French and the Buccaneers, a lot of battles here and there, but it wasn't until this treaty, the Treaty of Ryswick in 1697. Where, of course, Europe is always at war. They're always battling with each other. French, Dutch, Spanish, British. They're always warring with each other. And they have these temporary, moments of peace where they'll sit down and say, okay, this is not benefiting us. Let's, stop fighting each other and let's figure some things out before they go back to war again, right? So, but this in particular had a special meaning for Hispaniola. In 1697, the Treaty of Ryswick was signed, and it was really between, I believe it was the Dutch, the Spanish, and the French. And I think there were some other countries that were involved in that as well. But in regards to Hispaniola, they decided that, okay, well, we already have a lot of French activity on the western side of the island, so why don't we just take that over? And that was the kind of like the agreement that they made with the French. And effectively, they split the island in two. This is not today's map of how the Western French side and the Eastern Spanish side is divided. But in 1697, this is sort of like how they cut it, so that the French side, in accordance with the Treaty of Ryswick in 1697, the French was given that western third of the island, and the Spanish kept the 2/3 of the eastern side of the island. And that was the time where the island was divided, French and Spanish, in 1697. So the French took possession of the western side of the island, and they renamed it Saint-Domingue. And the Spanish side on the east, they just took the name of the capital, which of Hispaniola at the time, which was Santo Domingo, and they just renamed their whole territory Santo Domingo. So now you have two colonies, one island, Saint Domingue and Santo Domingo. Now, once the French took over that side of the island, they weren't necessarily interested in mining for gold and cattle ranching and livestock, right? They immediately saw that, you know, the land was good enough or fertile enough or pretty much had the best conditions to raise crops. And at this time, one of the crops that have been introduced that seemed to be very lucrative was sugarcane, right? So with the population already decimated, the indigenous population already decimated on the entire island, the French wanted to look at, to continue that transatlantic slave trade and bringing enslaved Africans over to work these crops. So that started like a whole, you know, process of, you know, raiding African, well, it didn't start the process, but they pretty much joined the process and increased the rate of enslaving Africans and bringing them over to the Americas, especially to that French side of Hispaniola, Saint Domingue. And, you know, this is just a few illustrations of, you know, Africans being enslaved and brought over. This is a picture of the door. I believe this is in Benin, the door of no return. It's sort of like a picture that's on the engravement. So this is just to show, you know, that the French wanted to go in and get as many laborers as possible for their new colony.
Yeah, I would also add that, you know, traditionally we, in Haiti in particular, we mentioned that our ancestors are from Guinea or Benin, and more so that West Africa area. But really through the slave raids, the Europeans got slaves from, you know, almost all of sub-Saharan Africa, really. And, you know, I was actually very interested to find out. I recently did my own ancestry DNA to find out that, you know, my DNA, you know, have ancestors from pretty much, you know, all of sub-Saharan Africa, really. So, you know, they raided villages and ethnic groups all over sub-Saharan Africa to get the slave labor that they needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So now we get into like slavery in Saint Domingue. This is just an illustration from my first book, Haiti, the First Black Republic. And it was pretty tough. Like the conditions of slavery in the Caribbean was one of the harshest of, especially under the French, was one of the harshest in the Americas. And let's see what else we got there, especially on sugar plantations, right? Sugar plantations was one of the worst parts of, one of the worst crops for enslaved Africans to work on. It was the plantations, the season was pretty much cut into two, like harvesting and planting, right? And it was the harvesting in particular, you know, the cutting of the cane, because you know, the way that the sharp edges of the sugar cane and just that labor intensive with the sugar mills and stuff. I mean, the mortality rate of enslaved Africans on sugar plantations was very high. And accidents happened all the time, especially in the sugar mills. Like you had to push the sugar cane through these machines that pressed the juice out of the sugar cane. And I mean, you would have amputations all the time with, you know, Africans getting their hands stuck in the sugar mills, you know, it's all types of craziness. On top of the cruelty of, you know, the slavers that would pretty much treat you as property. They'll do whatever they want to do to you. If they want to kill you, they can kill you. I mean, you know the whole slavery deal. So but sugar proved to be a very lucrative product, especially for French Saint-Domingue.
Yeah, I would add in terms of the sugar, I was going to get right to that. In terms of Saint-Domingue becoming the Pearl of the Antilles, France's most profitable colony, right? In 1767, the colony exported 72 million pounds of raw sugar and 51 million pounds of refined sugar. And that's sort of what this profitability is what led to Saint-Domingue being referred to as the Pearl of the Antilles, one of the richest colonies in the world in the 18th century French Empire. It was the greatest jewel and imperial France's mercantile crown. And by the 1780s, Saint-Domingue was producing about 40% of all the sugar and 60% of all the coffee consumed in Europe. So you had this single colony that's roughly the size of Hawaii, producing more sugar and coffee than all the British West Indies colonies. So including all the 13 U.S.-British colonies, generating a lot of revenue for the French government and enhancing its power around the world.
Yeah, and all the Spanish colonies. I mean, this one little area was outproducing like pretty much every colony put together, right? So it was definitely the Pearl of the Antilles. It was the envy of all the countries, Spain, British, and everyone. And you'll see later on in this program, in this session, you'll see that they all made a play for Saint-Domingue at one time in history. So the money that was being generated, the wealth that was being created by Saint-Domingue was pretty much the top in colonial times during this time of time between 1697 and 1791. So now the thing that happened that started creating these revolts, and I don't want to say that revolts weren't happening. Revolts were happening in Africa, in the villages, on the coast, on the ships, all the way up to, bringing the enslaved Africans onto the plantations. There were revolts happening all the time. None of them really stuck, mostly because of organization, right? But just to give you guys an idea of the population that was happening in Saint-Domingue, let's say right before the revolution started in 1791, it was approximately 40,000 white Europeans, about 20 to 25,000 mixed race, right? And then about 450 to 500,000 enslaved Africans, right? Black people. And a large percentage of that 500,000 enslaved Africans were African born because of that mortality rate, right? It was often less expensive to take care of an enslaved African than it was to purchase a new one, right? And so that was kind of like the mentality these slavers had. So instead of investing in building hospitals and doing, taking care of these Africans, they would rather just work them to death and import, a new stock. At its peak, let's say 1790, before the revolution started, slavers in Saint-Domingue were importing 40,000 enslaved Africans per year, right? 40,000, that's a large number. So that just kind of and a lot of these Africans that were coming in and being enslaved were not just regular people. At this time in Africa, there were a lot of wars happening between tribes, and the losing side would be sold into slavery. So you had a lot of different people with war experience that were coming into the colony and had a big effect on the temperament of the colony at that time. And
to that, Frantz, I would say that because you had about 40,000 enslaved Africans being brought to the colony every year, and we had the high mortality rate of the enslaved Africans on the island at all times in the latter part of the 18th century. The majority of slaves in the colony were African born.
Yep. Absolutely, absolutely. So now we get into like, I know we said like there were a lot of revolts happening, but one of the major revolts or rebellions, I should say, or even a revolution, I can even call Mukunda rebellion or revolution, was Mukunda. The story of Mukunda was one of my favorites. Yeah, I mean, I wrote a book about it, about Mukunda. But, you know, his story was he was captured in Africa in his village, which is in the Congo region, and brought over. But he was the son of a chief. I mean, his story, I can't get too deep into this story because there's a lot that we have to cover still. But one of the more effective rebellions was the Mukunda Rebellion, which happened in the 1750s. And Mukunda's choice of attack was he was an herbalist, right? And he also had Muslim background. He was a herbalist. He came to IET. He became a Hugon, right? Started practicing voodoo. And his idea was to unite the Maroons so that they can eventually attack the slavers on the plantations. Well, he marooned into the mountains where he found, you know, thousands of other Maroons. And his idea was to unite them to attack the enslavers, take over the whole island, right? That was his mission. And that spread. And one of his modes of attacking was using poison, like a lot of the water wells, a lot of the animals, a lot of the informants. So just because you were Black doesn't mean that you were safe from Mukunda. If he thought he couldn't trust you, you're an informant, you know, he was going to get you. So, and that took root. He was eventually captured in 1758. And, you know, the stories kind of, and, you know, there's two stories of what happened after that, but you could get my book in order to figure out the whole Mukunda story. But what that did, it planted a seed in both the minds of the enslavers and the Africans, right? Like, okay, we need to fight back. And also the enslavers were like, okay, we need tighter control on the enslaved population. So that Mukunda Rebellion was very important on both sides of the network. Okay, and also
before we leave Mukunda, Frantz, I would
sure.
also mention the fact that he really served as a symbol and inspiration to the Maroons, right? And while he was burned at the stake, there was this belief amongst the Africans who were there, because the French had allowed the slaves there in attendance as he was being burned at the stake to scare them. And it was belief amongst those Africans who were present that he turned into a winged animal, like a fly or something, and flew away, and he actually didn't die in this, at the stake.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of my favorite stories is the story of Mukunda. So like I said, I wrote a book about him. I'm currently sold out of Mukunda, but I actually have it on Kindle, on the Kindle, Amazon Kindle. So you can actually get the digital version of that book if you're interested in learning more. All right. So now we enter kind of like the Revolution era, right? So of course, 1776, the American Revolution, if you want to call that a revolution. And then now 1789, we have the French Revolution, right? So this is very important as how it relates to the colony, the French colony, because a lot of royalists were down in the colony, right? Like a lot of them lived in France and controlled their plantations from France, but a lot of them lived in the colony, Saint-Domingue, and they following all of this that's going on. And one thing that the French Revolution was trying to do, they were trying to overthrow the monarchy, right? I don't know if that was the initial outset of what they were trying to do, but that's eventually what happened. And so this is being followed very closely in the colony. And one of the things that came out of the French Revolution was a document called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, which pretty much means that no person is above the other, right? But of course, that did not pertain to, the mixed race and Blacks, right? So it's just, poor whites and rich whites, right? They're trying to find a common ground between them without, thinking about the mixed race who are pretty much second-class citizens, and, the Blacks who they didn't even regard as being human, right? These are just chattel, that's personal property. So that started a big movement in the colony in Saint-Domingue of the mulattoes. The mulatto I refer to as like the mixed race. Sorry for anyone who's offended about that term mulatto, but in history books, that's how they refer to it. So, of mixed race. So one of the leaders of the mixed race was this guy over here to the left, Vincent Auger, and he was trying to pretty much fight for the rights of the mixed race, because they were being treated as pretty much second-class citizens in Saint-Domingue, and he was tired of it. I mean, even to be mixed race in Saint-Domingue, means that any white that's living in the colony, rich or poor, pretty much had power over you, right? The mixed race, they could acquire property, they could acquire wealth, but as far as that was pretty much it. Right? They weren't enslaved. A lot of them were enslaved. Not too many of them were enslaved, but some of them were enslaved. But the majority of them were not enslaved, and they were able to accumulate wealth. So they had wealth, but they didn't have a lot of rights. And so Vincent Auger aimed to rectify that. So he started a little rebellion along with his buddy here, Jean-Baptiste Chauvin, and they tried to attack the white establishment down there, and that rebellion was put down very quickly, and it went back to the status quo. So now we come into the other part. I'm sorry, I'm shamelessly plugging all of my stuff here. This is the cover of my Boukman book, Boukman and Cécile Fatima. So just like how the mulattoes was following all of this political stuff that's happening in France with this French Revolution, the enslaved Africans were as well, right? The enslaved population in Saint-Domingue was following everything, right? So they're talking about declarations of rights of man and, equal rights and stuff like that. So now the enslaved population, they're like, yeah, that sounds good to us too, right? And rumors are spreading all over the place that, the king, so now the monarchy is in jeopardy in France. And, they're spreading rumors down, in the colonies, and it's going through the enslaved population that the king is on the side of the enslaved population, that they want to give them an extra free day. They want to abolish the use of the whip. They're trying to do all of these different things, which are rumors, right? But the timing was right for Cécile Fatima. She had been putting together a plan of revolt, and now with the temperament being the way it is, the political the politics that are happening at the time between the mixed race and the whites, the Grand Blanc, the Petit Blanc, they figured that now would be a good time to strike. And Cécile Fatima and Boukman, Boukman, they put together this, what's called the Bois Caïma ceremony. And they decided that this was going to be the time for them to fight for their freedom. Right, so that's exactly what happened. The Bois Caïma ceremony happened August 14th, 1791. Then the week after, the following Sunday, August 21st, I believe, August 22nd, all the enslaved Africans in the north of the country rose in rebellion pretty much at the same time. And they started burning down plantations. They started, they went from plantation to plantation, burning everything down, killing masters, killing all the whites and stuff like that. I mean, it was it was a scene that I wish I could have seen with my own eyes. But it definitely was a growing movement, and Boukman was at the head of that movement, right? Going from plantation and went all across the north. All the whites pretty much ran to the capital, which was Cap Francais at the time, which is today Cap Haitian. And, you know, they pretty much tried to run for cover, and the rebellion just kept on getting bigger and bigger. And Boukman pretty much made an attempt to raid the capital, Cap Francais at the time, and that's when he was captured. And a lot of you probably know, they captured him, they decapitated him, put his head on a pike, put it at the edge of town, and hoping that that would make the rebels go away. But eventually it didn't. And, new leaders started rising up in the revolution. In particular, these two, Jean-Francois and Biassou, pretty much took over. Boukman was the head, and Jean-Francois and Biassou were pretty much his lieutenants. But once Boukman was executed, then these two, there's actually a third one also, Génon, but he was executed by these guys, and these two eventually took over the rebellion at that time. They were the leadership was a little bit questionable, in my opinion. Dave, you could say what you know about these guys, but once Boukman, I feel personally, once Boukman was executed, that the vision was kind of thwarted a little bit, because Jean-Francois and Biassou, they saw the condition of their army. Pretty much they didn't have anything, right? They weren't a trained army. It was just pretty much rebels with machetes. They didn't necessarily know how to use guns after they took them from, from the French that they killed. And they were pretty much a tattered group, and a lot of them pretty much went out into their own bands. So you had a lot of different maroon bands. So there was not a whole lot of organization. But Jean-Francois and Biassou, they eventually felt that, there's no way we're gonna beat the French, and they started negotiating, right? And one of the negotiations was, okay, well, we'll send the population, back onto the plantations if you allow a few of us our freedom, right? Like maybe 300 of the leaders our freedom, and we'll make sure that we end this revolution and this rebellion and put everybody back onto the plantation. And the French commission, or the enslavers, they were like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to make any type of those demands. We're not going to make any type of agreement with you guys. Everybody is going to go back to the plantation once this thing is over. And so Jean-Francois and Biassou, pretty much, they said, okay, well, it is what it is. And along with a few of the other leaders, they approached the Spanish, which was on the other side of the island in Santo Domingo. And the Spanish, it was pretty much an agreement between the rebels, the enslaved Africans, and the Spanish government, the governor at the time. And they offered the rebels their support. And along with that support, they gave them money, they gave them weapons, they gave them food, and they trained the rebel army, right? And so that kind of breathed new life into them. And they were able to keep up the fight against the French. So now we get into things are happening back in France again, right? So the monarchy is officially overthrown in 1792, right? And now we have the French Republic. There's no monarchy. So the rest of the monarchies that's going on in Europe, they are going crazy. The British monarchy, the Spanish monarchy, they're looking at what's happening in France, and they are none too pleased. So that starts a whole nother round of hostilities that's going on in Europe. And it came to a head in 1793, where they executed King Louis XVI. right? It was a lot of you heard of the reign of terror that was happening in France, right? So it culminated with them bringing the king of France, right? Put his head in the guillotine, executed him in 1793. And you can only imagine the royalists that was in the colonies, how they felt about this. So now we come to this man, right? This great man. I mean, we could pretty much do a whole presentation just on this guy alone, right? Not even just 1 hour. We could probably talk about this guy for about, a month straight without, coming to all of the accomplishments that he made. I mean, he was very instrumental, because remember at this time, the rebels are now have the support of the Spanish army, right? The Spanish governor has given them support. And this is where Toussaint starts to really show his talents. Of course, he was in the rebel camps, once they were going against the French. But he was more like the medicine man. He took care of the horses. He had kind of like a low profile in the rebel camps. But then he was also one of the ones that were very smart. He was literate, he could write. So he was actually in those negotiations with Jean-Francois and Biassou, with the French when they were trying to negotiate some type of truce. But when that fell apart, he went over with the rebels over to the Spanish. And that's when he really started to shine, right? He had his followers. He was instrumental in training the rebels. And once they started getting onto the battlefield against the French, I mean, that's when he really showed his talents, and he started becoming, the legend. That's pretty much where the legend started, when he was with the Spanish. So also, let's see, what else we got here? Okay, yes. So as head of the Spanish, well, he wasn't necessarily head of the Spanish. It was still Biassou, Jean-Francois, and Toussaint. Those are the three main guys that, that the Spanish had to fight against the French, right? So Toussaint was just started making leaps and bounds ahead of Jean-Francois and Biassou. So they started taking territory away from the French. Toussaint would raid a lot of the different forts on the French side of the island in Saint-Domingue, and pretty much make them Spanish forts. Right? He was taking over a lot of different territory on the French side in Saint-Domingue. So now the French, they're looking at this situation like, well, we can't lose this colony, right? Like a lot of their forces are occupied in Europe fighting wars. They were kind of limited to how many people they could send to the colony so that they can save it. So what the Republic did was they sent a French commission, right? It was 3 guys. One of the guys was this guy that you see here, Sonthonax, right? So they sent Sonthonax down to Saint-Domingue to handle the situation. And Sonthonax has a background in abolition, right? So he's pretty much like one of these, forward-thinking French Republic guys. So they send him to the colony to try to save the colony, do what he can. So he gets down there, sees the situation, what's happening with Toussaint taking over territory all over the French side of the island. And he's like, wow, it looks kind of bad right here. I don't know if we're going to be able to, the forces that he had to fight against Toussaint and the Spanish was not enough. So he said he took drastic steps. And he said the only way that we're going to be able to save this colony is to abolish slavery, right? So he used his power. I mean, when the French Republic sent him to Saint-Domingue, they pretty much gave him absolute power. So he used that power that was given to him. And in, I believe it was August 1793, he wrote he abolished slavery, right? He wrote this whole constitution, which abolished, not a constitution, but a decree, which abolished slavery in 1793. And that was the beginning of it, right? So Toussaint, now is looking at this situation like, all right, well, if I stay with the Spanish and I start to continue to take over territory in the French, well, the Spanish still has slavery, right? So if I take over all of this for the Spanish, then, you know, we're still going to have slavery. They're just going to come over and enslave our people. But if I go back with the French, then now slavery is abolished, then there's something that we can really fight for. So Toussaint made the decision to go back with the French. Yeah, that's right. I said it right there. So, so Toussaint now leaves the Spanish, pretty much, and Jean-Francois and Biassou stayed with the Spanish, but Toussaint took his direct officers. I believe with him was like his brother Paul, Moise was with him, Dessalines was with him, a lot of different of his officers, his like loyalists that followed him, along with a lot others, like thousands, hundreds of others, followed Toussaint back with the French. And they started, and all the territory that Toussaint was responsible for taking under the French name, now he went back, reconquered all of those territories and pushed the Spanish back into their territory in Santo Domingo. And, you know, ultimately becomes, you know, a French lieutenant, and starts, you know, now he has an army, he's becoming very powerful, and starts to unite with Sonthonax and the other governors of Saint-Domingue. Dave, you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay, cool. Just checking. Yeah. All right, so Toussaint back with the French. Okay, now, so like I said, all of those things that are happening in France is starting to take root in the colony, Saint-Domingue. So the royalists that are down in the colonies, they were not happy about the execution of King Louis, right? And this whole French Republic thing. So what they do down in the colony, they form like a separatist kind of group, separatist union called the Colonial Convention, right? And they do not like the fact that all of their slaves are now free. And, you know, they're just not feeling this whole new republic situation. So what they did was a lot of the, you know, the enslavers and the Grands Blancs, like the elitists that were in the colony, they turned to the British, right? So the British have a colony right there in Jamaica at the south of Saint-Domingue. So they turn to them and they say, listen, the French, I don't know what's going on with them. They abolished slavery. They're doing all these different things. So they offered their land to the British. They said, if you guys come in and break up this whole French Republic thing, then we'll proudly, you know, support a British takeover of the island. And the British are like, absolutely. You know, this is the richest colony in the Americas, right? Even with all of this stuff, all of this whole revolution that's going on, all the powers, colonial powers, are like, no, well, you know, we still, once we restore slavery, we'll get this whole thing running up again, right? And then we'll have this very valuable colony. So the British were like, okay, they saw the opportunity. They supported the royalists that were already on the colony, the French royalists, and they started taking over. I mean, the royalists pretty much opened their doors to the British, and they came in. They took over a lot of different lands, a lot of different forts, all throughout Saint-Domingue, and that's why today you still see a lot of British forts and imprints in Haiti today, based off of this part in history. So now the French Republic, who do they turn to? They turn to their most powerful warrior at the time, Toussaint, right? They say, Toussaint, here's the situation. The British are pretty much fully occupied in the south of the colony, right? And they're gaining ground all over the place. So Sonthonax turns to Toussaint and they say, we need to get rid of them, right? And Toussaint's like, no problem. So he pretty much makes war on the British to get them out of the colony. And the two people that he had with him at the time, his top lieutenants, was Dessalines and Rigaud. Andre Rigaud, he was a mixed race guy from the south of the country. I believe he's from Okai. And he was a brilliant military man. And he was very instrumental in the battle against the British, right? And so was Dessalines. So Toussaint enlists the help of Dessalines and Rigaud. They go down and they start to war against the British, and eventually they defeat the British and get them completely expel them off of the island. So Rigaud and Toussaint become like two of the most powerful men in the country. Because Rigaud pretty much had the complete loyalty of the mixed race, and Toussaint had the complete loyalty of the blacks, right? So, but they were in union, right? Even though Rigaud was more powerful in the south, Toussaint was more powerful in the north. But they were able to come together, fight off their enemies, and so Saint-Domingue became, stayed French, and the British threat was alleviated. But ultimately, there was a civil war between Toussaint and Rigaud, right? That was spurned by the French. So this is later in the 1790s, right? So like getting close to 1800, maybe 1798, 1799 was when Rigaud and Toussaint started fighting against each other. I believe they call it the War of Knives, right? But that was spurred on by the French government. And the French government now happening in France is slowly, the Republic is dying off and it's turning back into the democracy because now Napoleon is starting to come into power, right? And all the old colonists that fled the colony and went back to France, they're all in Napoleon's ear trying to, say like, hey, we need to re-subjugate the Africans down in Saint-Domingue. We need to restore slavery and we need to get the colony back up and running. We've lost fortunes. So now they're starting to try to divide and conquer, right? That's what they do. So they pretty much put a wedge between Toussaint and Rigaud, and they ended up fighting against each other. Toussaint pretty much sent Dessalines to do the heavy lifting in those battles. And Dessalines, that's pretty much where he made his name, right, in that war against the mixed race, which is why even to Dessalines' death, the mixed race, the mulatto group, they always looked at Dessalines as a tyrant, but because of that War of Knives. So, but Toussaint and Dessalines were successful, and they banished Rigaud, and Rigaud actually went back to France. He was not deported, he just kind of like ran away on a ship along with Pétion. Rigaud's top officers was Pétion and Boyer at that time, right? Both who became presidents in Haiti, and fled the island, went to France, and Toussaint pretty much gained control of the whole colony. The whole Saint-Domingue. All right, so unfortunately, we at 2 p.m. I'm gonna keep going. I apologize, I knew this was gonna be a long lesson today or a long session, but unfortunately, Dave, I think has to jump off. Dave, you there?
I can stay for a couple more minutes.
Okay, all right, cool. I'm just going, so, because, we still got a lot going on. So whenever you wanna jump in, just jump in. Don't worry about interrupting me. All right, cool. So now pretty much Toussaint is the supreme ruler. He's pretty much like all the different governors, French governors that came to Saint-Domingue, Toussaint would send them back to France because he felt that Blacks should be ruled by Blacks, right? So even Sonthonax, who abolished slavery and was actually friends with Toussaint, he sent them back to France, right? He sent Sonthonax back to France. He sent whenever the French would send a new governor down to Saint-Domingue, they wouldn't last. Toussaint would send them right back, right? So Toussaint was pretty much the head guy in charge of the colony. Let's see. So, okay, yeah. So all this hostility, Toussaint wasn't a dumb guy, right? He knew that his actions were going to have ramifications, right? Sending back governors and commissioners, and he being pretty much having supreme control of the colony. He knew that that the government was changing in France. Now it's not a republic. It was heading from a republic to a dictatorship with Napoleon. And so he felt that with Spain still occupying the eastern side of the island, he felt that that was still a threat, so that, you know, the French could come into that side of the island and attack Saint-Domingue from the interior. And the interior was Toussaint's stronghold, right? It wasn't necessarily the coast, because they didn't have ships, warships, right? So colonial powers could come onto the coast with their gunboats and canonize, you know, the coastal cities. Toussaint's real power was in the interior of the country, so he wanted to secure that. So with Spain, with Santo Domingo still being under Spanish dominion and with slavery still happening over there, he went over, I believe he sent his nephew Moise there with 10,000 soldiers, and he said, okay, we need to take over the Spanish side of the island. So in 1801, he sends over Moise. They take over. I mean, it wasn't even really a fight, right? I mean, at this point, Toussaint's army is seasoned warriors, right? They go over there with 10,000 men. I mean, it's not even a fight, really. And they march into the governor's palace. They pretty much hand them the keys to the country, right? And at that point, Toussaint controls the whole island of Hispaniola, Santo Domingo and Saint-Domingue. So at this point, Napoleon is supreme ruler in France, and now he has designs on Saint-Domingue, right? And bringing slavery back to the French colonies, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Saint-Domingue, all of these places. So once Napoleon takes power, he writes a constitution that's going to govern the colonies, to govern the French, but he stopped short of writing a constitution for the colonies, right? He said that the colonies will be governed under special decree. So there was essentially no laws to govern the colony. And Toussaint looked at that as a bad sign, right? So Toussaint is like, you know what? That doesn't sound good to me, right? So what Toussaint does is he puts together a commission, writes a constitution. In the constitution were things like, slavery will be abolished forever. He's going to be governor general for life, and all different types of progressive ideas as well, and sends that constitution to Napoleon, right? Napoleon receives the constitution and he's not happy, right? I mean, even though his designs were already that, okay, we're gonna bring slavery back to the colonies, he used that constitution that was sent to him by Toussaint as like an excuse almost, right? It's like, oh, you know what? That's when he starts talking about, the gilded Negro, and, he needs to stop the march of the Blacks and stuff like that. So all different types of things were happening, but essentially what happens, he puts together an expedition and sends out about 20 to 30,000 soldiers on 80+ warships to go invade Saint-Domingue, right? And there was a 3-part plan that he put in place. Part 1 of the plan was, okay, we're going to arrest all of the generals, the top generals, or relieve them of their duty. Oh, yes?
Sorry, there's something going on in the chat room that needs to be addressed because it's really, really distracting. If those who are having their side conversation could just please stop, because if not, it's going to make me want to leave. And I really want to pay attention to what you're saying.
Oh, Sam, I noticed a lot of activity was happening in the chat room. What's going on, guys? What are y'all doing? Who's doing what? What? Tucson never captured, got captured. I reckon share will not talk like you. Hey guys, come on. Let's be a little civil here. All right. I'm gonna go back to the chat room at the end of the session. There's probably like about 10 more minutes left, and I'm gonna address everybody's questions. So let's like stop the activity for now. If you have questions pertaining to the session and what we're talking about, then, definitely put your questions down. But, all the other side stuff, please, it's distracting to a lot of people. So let's do that. All right. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, French invasion of Saint-Domingue, the 3-part plan, Napoleon, is to pretty much to enslave the population, disarm the population, arrest all the generals, send them back to France, and restore slavery. That was the plan that Napoleon put in place. And Napoleon actually never set foot in Saint-Domingue, right? He stayed in France. What he did, he sent his brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc, right, at the head of this expedition. And the plan was to accomplish all of these goals in 30 days. So Leclerc gets to Saint-Domingue. First person he comes across is Henry Christophe, right? So this is actually an engraving in Haiti at one of the statues of Christophe. When Leclerc approaches the coast in Cap Haitian, or Cap Francais, where Christophe was in charge of, and refused to let him onto the island for them to disembark from their ships, right, and keeps them at sea. And it was a glorious act of defiance, right? And then when Leclerc eventually says, well, we're disembarking tomorrow, Christophe pretty much burns down the entire city, right? Starting with his own mansion, with his own governor's palace, which I don't even think he moved into it yet, right? But it was a sign that, these people are coming. It's time to go into the interior and get ready for a fight. And he started that off with burning down his own mansion. So they burned down. So when Leclerc and the expedition came onto Cap Haitian or Cap Francais, they pretty much stepped into the city full of ashes. So now we get into all of the different battles, right? Well, I can't go into detail with all of them, even though I would love to, but there were so many different battles between the rebels and the French. I'll just go into a few of the ones that are more the famous ones. This one in particular, the Battle of Krita. Pretty much there was 600 rebels, including Dessalines, and this woman who I actually wrote about in my new book, She Rose, Mai Jean. And there's also General Lamartiniere. A lot of different generals were there at this battle, but it was only about 600 to 800 of them. And the fort was seized by 12,000 French soldiers, including Pétion. Remember I said Rigaud, Pétion, and Boyer, they all fled back to France. Well, they came back to Saint-Domingue with Leclerc's expedition, right? So they were on the same boat as the expedition, Rigaud, Pétion, and Boyer. So they all came back, and they were with the French at the time that they were seizing Saint-Domingue and trying to re-enslave the population. Even though they say that they weren't privy to the actual plan, which was to re-enslave everybody, the Black population, but they did indeed come back with the expedition. So they were all in there trying to seize these 600 rebels. And they actually, it was a big battle, and the rebels actually, a large majority of them actually ended up escaping through those 12,000 soldiers. And it's a great story. I wrote it in one of my books, in the Shiro's book, if you want to know more about it. So they're pretty much going back for a good year, battling back and forth. The French, Toussaint's strategy was to go into the interior, fight them off, and wait until the spring, which is the rainy season, which is kind of funny thinking about like now, right? With all this coronavirus going on in the world. One of the things that completely decimated the European expedition was yellow fever, right? So Toussaint's strategy was to hold off into the rainy season. And then that way he knew from fighting the British years ago that when it was in the rainy season, a lot of the British died from yellow fever. They were susceptible to disease. So Toussaint's strategy was when the French expedition came was, all of these guys are gonna die off once the rainy season comes, right? And that's exactly what happened, right? Yellow fever started to ravage the French army. And they were actually in a good position to strike. But Leclerc, again, we talked about this yesterday with the tricks, the lies, the ruse in order to gain advantage. He kept on talking to, communicating with Christophe, right? Henry Christophe, sending letters. In fact, a good friend of Christophe that was on the Leclerc, that was in the Leclerc army, the expedition, was writing Christophe saying that we're not here to, enslave the population. I don't know why you guys are fighting us. We just want to join with you guys so that we could, manage the colony and this, that, and the other. And, he got to Christophe, right? And Christophe is looking at his situation like, man, I've been living in the mountains. My army is decimated, this, that, and the other. So he's looking at this situation and he's trying to figure out what to do. He tells Toussaint, he's like, look, this is what they're telling us, blah, blah, blah. So Toussaint's like, all right, let's go talk to them, right? And Leclerc writes a letter before this meeting. This is a meeting that actually happened, that's depicted. My boy Kervin Andre did this painting, which is dope. I have a print of this. Leclerc personally writes a letter to Toussaint and Christophe saying that he's not here to restore slavery. All he wants to do is, fortify everything, and there's no reason for them to be fighting and get away, all this type of lies and tricks, right? And Toussaint's like, all right, let's go see what he has to say. And Toussaint said, okay, there's 3 conditions that we could call this truce. One is, you're never going to bring slavery back to this land again. All my generals, all my lieutenants, everyone keeps their rank, right? So, if you had Dessalines, who's a lieutenant, Christophe, who's a lieutenant, you're not allowed to demote them, right? And also Toussaint said that he was going to retire to his plantation in Ennery, right? And Leclerc agrees to everything, right? He's like, no problem. I'll give you whatever you want, blah, 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 agrees. So that eventually stops the hostilities between the rebels and the French expedition. It didn't stop the hostilities with the Maroons, right? There were a lot of different bands, like Toussaint and his crew. They didn't control all of the fighters. There were hundreds of different bands that were led by Maroons, like Sans-Souci, Hyacinth, a lot of different Maroons. But Toussaint pretty much controlled his army, his military. But when the Maroons saw that Toussaint and his guys went over with the French, well, not necessarily go over with the French, but joined the French, they didn't want anything to do with it. They continued to stay as Maroon bands, outside, working outside of the law. So now we have a truce, an end to the hostilities. So now what happens with Toussaint? Toussaint retires. He doesn't want to be part of anything, right? So he puts Dessalines in charge, Christophe is in charge, Pétion is there and everything. So he's like, okay, you know what? Well, not Pétion necessarily. Pétion was already with the French, but pretty much Dessalines and Christophe. Also, he had generals like Charles Belair. Actually, not Charles Belair at that time. Yeah, Charles Belair was there. A lot of different generals were there. So Toussaint goes back to his plantation. And Leclerc is like, well, okay, well, at this point, I can't really do anything to Toussaint, right? Without having his guys that are right here, helping me out, doing anything to me. So what he did was he trumped up charges against Toussaint, saying that Toussaint was trying to cause another rebellion, right? I think Leclerc intercepted a letter that Toussaint had written to one of the Maroons. In the letter, it said that it seems that, this hospital is doing the work for us, right? And in this particular hospital that Toussaint was referencing, the French military was dying by the hundreds because of yellow fever, right? Yellow fever was being spread. So Leclerc sees this letter and says that, oh, Toussaint is trying to, start another rebellion, and, tricks him again, uses one of Toussaint's friends, an informant or whoever, to meet with Toussaint. They go have this secret meeting, and at the meeting, the person who's meeting with Toussaint excuses himself out of the room, leaves Toussaint in the room by himself, and a dozen French officers come in and ambush him and arrest him, right? And that's how Toussaint was arrested. So he's arrested. They take not only him, but his whole family, his wife, his kids, his father-in-law, his servant, all of them are arrested, and they put on a ship and they're deported to France, right? And that's where Toussaint says his famous line about, the roots of liberty are numerous and deep. They'll rise back up, because he was confident at this time. Like my mentor, Baina Bello, says she classifies Toussaint as a legba, right? A legba is someone who opens the door, but doesn't necessarily walk through the door, right? But leaves the door open for the next person to come in. And that's what Toussaint is. So just because he didn't see the outcome of the revolution that he was, a huge part of, he was confident that he did his job. So he was able to walk off confidently.
Yeah, I would add that the actual quote, Frantz, is, and overthrowing me, you have cut and Saint-Domingue only the trunk of the tree of liberty. It will the roots, for they are numerous and deep. And in terms of the Legba reference, for those who don't know, Legba is one of the spirits of Vodou tradition. And, as you mentioned, it's sort of like seen as the master of the crossroads who opens up doors and paths for believers. And in terms of Napoleon's decision to have Toussaint arrested and removed, he famously said a decade later, while he himself was imprisoned on the island of St. Helena after his military defeat, Napoleon famously said, my decision to destroy the authority of the blacks in Saint-Domingue is not so much based on consideration of commerce and money as on the need to forever block the march of the blacks in the world. He had said this before, and then later on he said that while he was in St. Helena, that my greatest mistake was to try to subdue Haiti by force of arms. I should have let Toussaint Louverture rule it.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. So that's pretty much what happened with Toussaint. That was pretty much the end of Toussaint in Saint-Domingue. But of course, his legacy, lives on. And so he's put up in jail in France at, in the Jura Mountains, in this big castle fortress called Fort de Joux. And he's pretty much, in cold weather, and develops all different types of sicknesses. Napoleon never sees him. The only thing Napoleon was interested in was a supposed fortune that he was hiding. So he would, send his, emissaries to go to Toussaint, try to figure out where his fortune was. But all Toussaint was worried about was, Toussaint wanted to state his claim to Napoleon face to face. He would write dozens of letters to Napoleon, but, Napoleon would never answer him, never went to see him. And, eventually Toussaint pretty much developed all different types of sicknesses, from being in that cold weather, being pretty much starved to death. He developed gangrene, pneumonia, and eventually passed away April 7th, 1803. So now, back in Saint-Domingue, you have Christophe, Dessalines, and Pétion. They're essentially still partnered with the French, right? They are pretty much French generals now. Leclerc gave them generalships, so they're generals in the French army. And one of the tipping points that led them to go back and rejoin the rebels was something that happened in Guadeloupe, right? So the general governor of Guadeloupe was just itching and waiting to restore slavery, right? And he pretty much restored slavery kind of like almost like a false start, like he wasn't supposed to, but he did, right? In fact, I believe he may have gotten instructions from France to restart the slave trade. So they restarted the slave trade. But there's a lot of, merchant ships that's going from France to Guadeloupe to Saint-Domingue. So a few of the blacks that were on the ship that came from Guadeloupe and ended up going to Saint-Domingue, they started saying like, they started slavery back again in Guadeloupe. So that kind of like rings the alarm to Pétion. And Pétion is like, look, this is the ultimate plan that they have here in Saint-Domingue. And the number one thing that Leclerc was commissioning these generals, Christophe, Dessalines, and Pétion, to accomplish was to disarm the population. Toussaint and Sonthonax had armed the entire population of Saint-Domingue. The peasant farmers, everybody had weapons, right? Because Toussaint's one of his main parts of his army was the militia, right? So they were farmers, but when things went down, the militia, which were the farmers, they'll pick up their guns and they'll join the army, right, and fight. So Leclerc understood that, and he wanted to disarm the population. And Leclerc also wanted to fight, those maroon bands that were always active, right? So that was pretty much what Christophe, Dessalines, and Pétion's their job was. But once Pétion came back and was like, they're starting slavery again, he approached Dessalines and Christophe, and they all made the decision together to rejoin the rebel camp and fight against, the French. And at this time, Leclerc himself had died of yellow fever, right? So Leclerc dies of yellow fever, and a new general takes his place. This guy, Rochambeau, right? And Rochambeau was ruthless. Rochambeau was always in Leclerc's ear. He felt Leclerc was too soft, right? And Rochambeau made the realization, when they first came to the colony to re-enslave the population, that there's no way this population is going to be enslaved. So his idea was to exterminate everyone in the colony over the age of 13 years old and just bring in new enslaved blacks from Africa. And that's pretty much the mission that he was on. And he pretty much started an extermination campaign. But at this time, Dessalines was in power. Toussaint was very political in his movings, right? So, and he was, he didn't really constitute the idea of, okay, wholesale massacres and stuff like that. And if he needed something done that was like that, he would always send Dessalines. But now that Toussaint is out of the picture, Dessalines is able to match Rochambeau's cruelty, pretty much eye for an eye, right? So at this one point in time, Rochambeau is off the coast of Cap Haitian, well, maybe not Cap Haitian, but off one of the coasts, where he drowns 500 Black soldiers, right? And Dessalines sees this, and on the mainland, and overnight, him and his army erects 500 gibbets, right? And hangs 500 French soldiers, French white soldiers. So he's pretty much matching Rochambeau cruelty for cruelty. Where Rochambeau pretty much met his match in Dessalines. And then it all comes to pretty much a head at the Battle of Bithia, November 18th, 1803. Sorry about this grainy picture. I didn't know it was grainy when I put it in there. But this is a depiction of the Battle of Bithia, November 18th, 1803. And this is pretty much the final battle, right? The French military has already been, decimated. There was no match for Dessalines. Dessalines is pretty much a military genius. Along with his top officers like Capois-Lamont and Christophe and all of these guys, they all meet up at Bithia, and Dessalines lands the final blow to the French army. And after that victory, pretty much sends Rochambeau and the rest of the French army packing, deports them back to France. The ones that stayed had a different fate. Some of the army escaped to the other side of the island. So, but pretty much the victory was won here, November 18th, 1803. And of course, January 1st, 1804 is Independence Day, right? They write their Declaration of Independence, written by Bois-Tonnerre, and it's read to the population January 1st, 1804. If you guys haven't read that Declaration of Independence, I encourage you to do so. It's very powerful, right? You can find it in English if you don't read French or Creole. And January 1st, 1804, Haiti becomes independent. And it's one of the greatest stories. And Jean-Jacques Dessalines is voted by the other generals as the leader. So he's the first head of state of the first Black nation, independent nation.
Yeah, I would also add to that, Frantz, that to commemorate this Declaration of Independence on January 1st, 1804, Dessalines' wife, Claire Heureuse, began the tradition of having the former slaves having a squash soup to commemorate the independence. And squash soup was, of course, a delicacy that was only reserved for the French colonists. And so this was a way for the formerly enslaved Africans to celebrate their independence now that they are able to also drink the same soup that the former French colonists would drink as well. And it's a tradition that we still have in Haiti to this day. Every January 1st, Haitians always commemorate Independence Day by drinking squash soup, or soup du mou as it's called in Haitian Creole.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm sure everybody on this line has had, hopefully y'all had some soup du mou on January 1st, 1804, one of our favorite traditions. And the soup is delicious as well, so.
Yeah, and there's a wonderful documentary about the whole story called Liberty in the Soup. So I definitely encourage you all to look it up online so you could learn more about this. And I see someone here mentioning that they need a vegan recipe. It's definitely possible to do it too. It's based and it's made with squash, which is a vegetable, so definitely can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, shout out to Dudley Alexis, in Miami. In fact, he has a new documentary out now that's pretty good too. So, all right, guys, I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. Man, we made it. What time is it? Oh, it's 2:30. Oh, we only went 30 minutes over. So yeah, that's the end of this session. So, man, I'm sure we have 100 questions. I haven't even looked in the chat room. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this session, got some good information. There's no way I could have covered everything. We would have been on this thing all night. So putting this thing together, it's not more of what I put in it, it's what I leave out, right? So there's a ton of things that we didn't get a chance to cover, but it is what it is. We have a limited time. I don't want to keep you guys here forever. So, all right, let me go into the questions and see what we got.
This is amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, let's see. Recording. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Frantz. Thank you, Dave.
Oh, thank you, brother. Who's that? Swag?
Yes.
Swag. What up, Swag?
Haitian Swag, how's it going, man? Thanks for tuning in.
I had to. Thank you so much, guys.
Awesome, man. No problem. No problem.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear that.
Oh, this is Ellen from Orlando. My kids want to say something to you guys.
Okay. Hey. Oh, thank you. Thanks for logging on. Did you guys learn anything?
Yes.
All right, good. All right, fantastic. Thanks for logging on. Appreciate it.
Is there a way we can get this recording? Because this was really good. I know you're doing 6 of them, but.
Yeah, I actually recorded it this time. Yesterday I didn't record it, but today I recorded it. So I'll figure out how to get it to everybody that logged on today.
All right, thank you.
All right, no problem.
And one more thing though, Frantz, this is so fascinating too. I know it's so much information, but I don't know if you can extend something maybe after this week just on this topic. That would be very good.
Well, this is our new normal, right? Like we have to practice our social distancing. Right? So I'm gonna do what I can. I'm going to. All right, there's a lot of noise going on now, but so we have to figure out new ways to share information like this, right? So I'm gonna look at different things on my calendar. Like I was thinking of doing something completely on Toussaint, like on Toussaint's birthday, or on Flag Day, maybe doing something on Flag Day, and just doing different things where we could share, different information. So we'll see. We'll look at what we got, and then I'll try to do my best, to help share this information.
Thank you for the information.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. All right, let's see if I could go through some of these questions in the chat room. Let's see. 1503, first enslaved African arrival in Hispania. The pirates began attacking. Oh, someone just did a recap for me. Thank you. But where are the pirates from? Yeah, so the pirates were, from different parts. Like some were Dutch, French, and Spanish, right? So, not Spanish, Dutch, French, and British pirates. Right, let's see. Do you think the reason why Haiti had a successful revolt is because the enslaved Africans were new? That was definitely a big part of it. Yeah, because as soon as a lot of the enslaved Africans came from Africa, a lot of them just went and marooned, right? A lot of these guys were seasoned warriors, and they just pretty much lost battles with another tribe and were captured, brought over to the colony, but they were not docile, right? So once the Bois Cayama ceremony took place and the rebellions started, then, there were some of the fiercest warriors.
I would also add, Frantz, that there is a number advantage too in that at the time of, at the eve of the revolution, you had about 32,000 whites and about 500,000 enslaved Africans in 1789. So they definitely felt that they had strength in numbers, which emboldened them to lead this movement as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, which is one of the reasons why, you know, the slavery was so harsh. Like the colonists knew, the slavers knew that they were outnumbered, right? So they had to make examples. And I mean, they used torture techniques. I mean, they were pretty much terrorists, right? And they would find the most insane ways to inflict damage on this population, the enslaved population, to scare everybody else, right, into being, you know, pretty much domesticating them. So, so definitely a lot of the new Africans that came into the colony, they weren't pretty much, they weren't domesticated. You know what I mean? They were ready to fight. They were looking for a fight. So absolutely. Okay, I was waiting on this. Plug on. I'm so grateful for this information. Thank you. Yes, make your plugs, man. Yeah, I had a lot of plugs today. Definitely go thoroughbredbooks.com, get yourself some books. I can't do any book signings, so I got a bunch of books over here. Definitely go on the website. Let's see, I noticed Jean is always hyphenated. What does it mean? Jean? Oh, Jean, like the name, like Jean-Francois.
Jean means John. You know, in the French tradition, as is the same in the Spanish tradition, they tend to have long first names, or someone might have 2 or 3 names as part of their first name. So they tend to hyphenate first names for males with John followed by something else like Jean-Francois. And for women, very commonly the first name is preceded by Marie or Mary, M-A-R-I-E. And it's part of the Catholic tradition and both the French and the Spanish culture in particular to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, like I have 10 aunts named Marie. You know what I mean? So it's like, but you know, we always call them by like their middle name. Like my mom.
Yeah, the second name that follows the Marie.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, let's see. The French love hyphenated names. I don't have any support, trust me. Okay, let's see. Similar to hyphenated, yeah. Did Frederick have anything to do with this war? Frederick. Which Frederick? Frederick? Not sure which Frederick. Not Frederick Douglass.
Maybe Frederick the Great, perhaps. That's the only European monarch I can think of that they may have been. Who was the king of Prussia in the middle 18th century? So Prussia, which would eventually become Germany, wasn't really involved in these, you know, and these battles between French and the English happening at the time.
Right, very cool. Okay, let's see. Download Black GDP on Fire Stick, and you can learn documentary in 1803 for free. That's where I learned about this. Okay, cool. Thank you. Fire Stick. Okay, old school. Shut up, YouTube. Why are you guys over here cyber beefing? Come on now. All right, let's see. Miriam, can you share the recording at the end? Can I say? I don't see a whole bunch. How do you know how I look like? Come on, guys. All right, Toussaint never got captured, did he? Because I've been reading the book, and I don't think so. Just you didn't see in my book that he didn't get captured. Yeah, Toussaint was captured. We went over that. Because your mouth is. What are you guys doing? All right, let's see. Just close the chat. Ridiculous. If the group chat, yeah. Just all right. Question. Can you discuss more about the Bois-Caïma ceremony and the influence of voodoo over the Haitian Revolution? Which spirits were involved and which military leaders were actually priests and priestesses? Yeah, I mean, I wrote a whole book about the Bois-Caïma ceremony with Boukman and Cécile Fatima. So, I mean, in the access of time, you know, with our time restraints, I didn't want to go too deep into it. But yeah, Bois-Caïma was a voodoo ceremony, you know, and it was, I believe, Boukman took on, was it Ogu Farai, and Cécile Fatima was, which one was it, Dave? Azili Dantor, which was the spirits involved at the Bois-Caïma ceremony. But a lot of the leaders, initial leaders of the revolution, were at that ceremony. Simsé Toussaint was at the ceremony. Obviously, Boukman, Biassou, Jean-Francois. Biassou was also a Hugon as well. Boukman was
I would also add in terms of Biassou that after he was defeated by Toussaint, he went to Florida and actually lived in the town of St. Augustine in Florida, which was occupied by the Spaniards at the time still. And St. Augustine, of course, is the first planned city established in North.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so yeah, Biassou and Jean-Francois stayed with the Spanish. So at that time, that part of Florida was Spanish territory, and Biassou was up there. Let's see. Yes, Latrice, I'm interested in that too. It is no longer allowing me to record. I need access again. I need record permission. Oh, sorry about that. Let's see. Would you be able to send the link? So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to download the link onto my Dropbox, and I'm going to send that link to everyone who registered for this session, so that you guys could access it and download it on your computers instead of me trying to email it out to everybody. So I'll put the link in Dropbox, and then I'll email the link out to everybody that was on this session today. Okay, let's see. So Papa Lekba, Voodoos, and then Papa Lekba. Okay, please define who were the Maroons. I missed that. The Maroons are pretty much just the Africans, enslaved Africans that ran off of the plantation and started communities in the mountains outside of the reach of the enslavers. So the enslavers didn't necessarily always pursue the Maroons. They had pretty much like a task force that they made up of the mixed race that always went to kind of like hunt down the Maroons, but they didn't concentrate too much on trying to bring them back onto the plantation. So they created the Maroons, which were pretty much enslaved Africans that escaped the plantations. They started communities in the mountains. There were thousands of them. There were a lot of Maroons. So those who the Maroons were. And, Mukunda was a Maroon. Jean-Francois was a Maroon. A lot of the people that we talk about in history were Maroons. They weren't all necessarily enslaved. Okay, let's see. I need a vegan recipe. Yeah, there's vegan. Pretty much just leave the meat out. and I will offer this. I've been doing a lot of traveling with Baina Bello on our book tour, and she offers another version of the story of the soup Jumu, the independent soup that we drink on January 1st. She said that it was actually a Haitian recipe. Right, and the reason why she says that is because she did research trying to find soup Jumu in French society, right? Like in French cookbooks or in France. And what she found was like nobody makes soup Jumu, right, in France, or none of the French. You can't find it anywhere in their culture or in their society. So she felt that my Claire Rose actually created that recipe. And the reason that she used that pumpkin, really, you can only find that pumpkin, that squash in Haiti, I believe, right? So it's native to that land. And Claire Rose came up with the recipe because the army at the time, didn't really have a lot to eat, and so they wanted to have something that they could eat that had a lot of nutrients, a lot of vitamins. And that squash has tons of nutrients and vitamins, and they're able to eat like one bowl of soup and that'll last them a couple of days because they had the vitamins and nutrients. So, that's just another story of that. Let's see. This was absolutely amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can you send an email with the title of the documentary? Oh yeah, that was Liberty in a Soup by Dudley Alexis. That's my boy. I'll put it in the email when I send it out. How can we get this recording? Already said I'm gonna put it on there. Liberty in a Soup. I love this so much. Thank you, my 8th grader has truly been enlightened. Thank you. They teach the babies. I'm using this as a teaching resource for my poetry students. I teach high school. Awesome. Y'all really need to be supporting teachers in their certification programs. I told you I would not get this. I know. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing it. It's actually a good opportunity to share this type of history, because this type of history is not taught in our schools. Like anything about us is not really taught especially in elementary, middle school, high schools, and stuff like that. So this is a great opportunity to share some history that's about us. You know what I mean? Like so many times in this country, our history starts at slavery, right? And that's it, right? So, and then the civil rights movement and stuff like that. But there was an actual time where we actually kicked, butt. And, they try not to downplay it, but, not while I'm around. So will you plan offer classes for high schoolers? I'm willing to pay. Yes, I offer Pan-African. Oh, yeah, I could do something. I could put something together. What you think, Dave? You think we could put something together for high schoolers? Pan-African enrichment services, pre-K through 12. If we had a Haiti history tour in Haiti, I would definitely. Well, a friend of mine does Haitian history tours in Haiti. Gerlina Manuel, she does Bellevue tours. So definitely look up Bellevue tours. I went with her. We did the north of Haiti. We went to the Citadel. We went to Sanssouci Palace. That's when I went to the Taino Museum. So a lot of different things we did. So definitely look into Bellevue tours. Miriam, I would totally come to. Perfect. I'll be buying the book. Would they be considered the hillbillies my mom used to make reference to? I'm not sure what that meant.
So I think what she's referring to here, in Haiti, there's a tradition of calling people who live in the hills Mon. So yeah,
hillbillies
would be the translation. No, it's two completely different things. Maroons were rebels, warriors who were trying to fight for their freedom, right? Whereas the referred to as the hillbillies in Haiti today are more so people who are peaceful peasants who focus on growing their crops on the hillsides.
Yeah.
So two different things.
Yeah, hillbillies. Yeah, whenever I think of hillbillies, I just think of kind of like, hillbillies out here, like long beards, overalls, one of those hats, working on like a farmer type looking guy. All right, cool guys. So, man, we've been doing this almost 2 hours now. So definitely sponsored by Thoroughbred Books. Order your books, help support the movement, help share our great history. Log on thoroughbredbooks.com. I have all of these books available except for Mukunda. I'm completely sold out of Mukunda, which is one of my top sellers, but I pretty much have everything else. So go ahead, order the book. Also on Amazon, but it's probably better if you get it from my website. I'm offering free shipping. It's March, Women's History Month, so I'm offering free shipping for sheroes. So definitely take advantage of that. I appreciate it. And also, my co-host is also a sponsor. So talk a little bit about your project, Dave.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I run a nonprofit organization called Basketball to Uplift the Youth here in Haiti, and we use the sport of basketball as a tool to mentor and educate Haitian youth. In addition to that, I have my production company that uses multimedia as a way to educate the world about Haiti, to try and change the Haiti narrative, and also to educate Haitians here as well. So definitely look us up, and if you go on YouTube, Google Kobe mural video that we recently did here in Port-au-Prince to commemorate Kobe's achievements and to honor his legacy here in Haiti. And we have a couple of other projects coming up too, so definitely look us up.
Awesome, fantastic. All right, guys, that's the end of today's session. So we'll be back at it tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the empire. This is going to be fun. So you don't really always, we always get up to 1804 and then kind of like stop right there. But there was so much that was going on after, right? So now, okay, we defeat slavery, we defeat the white supremacy, and now we have the opportunity to create something. And man, there's so many different challenges, and but the vision of our leaders is really what I want to concentrate on, like what we were trying to accomplish, you know, with Dessalines and Christophe and those guys. They had big visions and they did some amazing things. So I definitely want to share some of that insight. And so that's going to be a great session tomorrow. So same time, 1 p.m. Wednesday, you're going to get into the empire, which Dessalines created, the kingdom, with Christophe created, and eventually the republic. So look forward to that. And that's the end. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for logging on. This was recorded. So I'm gonna go ahead, I must probably send it out later tonight because I gotta figure out my Dropbox situation. And then what I'll do, I'll send an email from the Eventbrite app. So you'll see an email that comes across that says from France or something, probably be like from Eventbrite. But the link is going to be in there for today's recording. All right, so thank you again. Everybody stay safe, wash your hands, you know, practice social distancing. Try to get you some toilet paper. You know, I still don't understand the toilet. I got me some toilet paper. I didn't go crazy with it like, you know, some people did. But yeah, we got enough, you know, to last us hopefully, you know, a couple of months in the house here. So everybody just stay safe out there. All right. And we'll talk again tomorrow. All right. Thank you, everybody. Peace.
All right.
All right.